With the running of the 2025 Daytona 500 this weekend, I thought it would be a good time to look back at some of the lesser regarded Daytona 500s in history. While the 500, like any big event, has produced plenty of iconic moments and memories, not every race can be a barn burner. Let's look back at the 5 worst Daytona 500s. Just as a disclaimer, 2001 will not be on this list. We all understand the events surrounding Dale Earnhardt's accident on the final lap, and why such a tragic moment hurt for so many people. But up to that point, the 2001 Daytona 500 was a great race with plenty of lead changes and lots of 3 and sometimes 4 wide racing. Overall, in terms of action, the 2001 500 is one of the better ones in history, the race itself being marred forever by the loss of Dale Earnhardt. Number 5, 2003. 2003 earns a spot here for being the shortest Daytona 500 in history, as the race only made it just past halfway to lap 109 before being called for rain. Sure, other 500s have been rain shortened, but this one slogged through 2 delays as NASCAR tried to keep things going. Even though I watched this race as a kid, I struggle to remember anything from this race other than Ryan Newman's slip through the front stretch grass. DEI as usual looked strong with Dale Jr. and Michael Waltrip, but Earnhardt had battery issues which put him a lap down, leaving Mikey to fend off challenges from the likes of Jimmie Johnson and Kurt Busch before the second rain delay forced the race to end prematurely. This race doesn't really deserve to be any higher on the list because the rain didn't really give it a chance to get entertaining in the late stages, but it's still a pretty forgettable 500 unless your name is Michael Waltrip or you worked for DEI. At least Mikey got to celebrate this one, unlike 2001. Daytona overall was pretty hit or miss in the early 2000s, with NASCAR changing the rules and aero packages from year to year before common templates arrived in 2003. Number 4, 1964. The 1964 Daytona 500 was marked by the debut of the new 426 Hemi and several front-running Chrysler cars. The new Hemi was so powerful and ahead of the curve that some sources claim that NASCAR ordered Chrysler teams to sandbag during qualifying and the dual races. Whether or not that's true, the Hemi was fully unleashed on race day, as Richard Petty led a staggering 184 of 200 laps and was the only car on the lead lap at the end. Even for the era, this one was a total bore, with the King putting a hurting on the competition. This one won't rank any higher because back then, NASCAR was a little bit more about actual competition rather than the sports entertainment side it shows today. I will tip my hat to Chrysler for outdoing their rivals. Sometimes, excellence should be rewarded instead of reined in, something that is all too common in modern racing. Number 3, 1972. The first Daytona 500 of NASCAR's modern era was a race of high attrition and another with a large margin of victory. With only 3 cautions for 17 laps, the race went by extremely quickly, and it's probably for the best as AJ Foyt dominated in his Wood Brothers Mercury, winning by 2 laps after his main competition, Richard Petty and Bobby Isaac, both DNF'd early on. This race has become something of a cool footnote in racing history, as Foyt joined Mario Andretti as the only 2 drivers to win the Daytona 500 and Indianapolis 500, but it just wasn't a particularly exciting race. Like 1964, you could argue that big margins of victory were common in that era, but even so, 1968 had a great battle between Cale Yarborough and Leroy Yarborough, no relation, and the 1969 edition was won on a last lap pass. So it wasn't impossible for Daytona to put on a great race back then. It just so happened that 1972 had a bunch of factors that allowed AJ Foyt to bring home a dominant victory. Number 2, 2013. Another one from personal experience, I found the 2013 Daytona 500 to be incredibly boring. The headline coming into the race was Danica Patrick starting first and leading several laps, but the first ever Gen 6 Daytona 500 totally fell flat. Most of the race was a single file draft train, and although several other editions of the race had turned into that during this era, 2013 was the worst of the worst. At least 2016 had an awesome finish, and 2021 had the Penske teammates take each other out, going for the win on the final lap. In this race though, Matt Kenseth in his first race for Joe Gibbs had a dominant car, but lost his engine 50 laps from the end. This, and an early wreck involving Kevin Harvick, Tony Stewart, and Kasey Kahne, were the only things that really happened all day. In 2013, it was hard to get a run and grab the lead. Jimmie Johnson held on as the field could barely do anything to work together to get past him. A minor accident in the back of the pack on the final lap punctuated what was a pretty boring race. If it wasn't for the media hype train involving Danica, this race would easily go down as the most forgettable Daytona 500 in recent history. In an era that's supposed to be full of parity and competition, this one was a total snoozer. Number 1, 2000. Bar none, the 2000 Daytona 500 is the worst Daytona 500 of all time. NASCAR mandated a rule that all teams had to use the same shock absorbers at Daytona and Talladega. Designed to slow the cars down, all it really did was make the cars incredibly tight, and no one could stay in the throttle long enough mid-corner to make a pass stick. The racing was so bad that there were only 9 lead changes in the entire race. A restrictor plate race in the 21st century having only 9 lead changes is an incredible stat, and not in a good way. In fact, the only memorable thing that happened in this race was Johnny Benson in an underfunded car for Tyler Jet Motorsports cycling to the lead through pit strategy and nearly holding on to win before the Fords, led by eventual winner Dale Jarrett, left Benson's Pontiac out to dry with only several laps to go. The race was so bad that even Dale Earnhardt said they took NASCAR Winston Cup racing and made it some of the sorriest racing. They took racing out of the hands of the drivers and the crews. We can't adjust and make our cars drive like we want. They just killed the racing at Daytona. This is a joke to have to race like this. Indeed, the 2000 Daytona 500 has a much-deserved crown as the worst Daytona 500 ever. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.